I want to welcome to the program somebody I've actually been interested in meeting for quite some time, and he in studio nonetheless, and brought just an absolute rash of goodies for the fellas. Ladies and gentlemen, Jim Banks.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
This is
great. It's great to be on a podcast that people actually listen to. My wife listens to your podcast. I have a podcast too, but she says yours is the only one that she listens to.
My wife has a better chance of listening to yours than mine, but I think maybe that's a marriage thing.
Could be.
You hear too much of somebody's voice. You don't want to,
Fair enough.
Listen, let's talk about these goods that you brought us. This is crazy. We've got beer, whiskey, chocolate, hats.
A little bit of it all. Craft beer from Fort Wayne, Indiana, Mad Anthony, the Auburn Lager. They used to call it Old Woody's Pale Ale. They changed the name to the Auburn Lager, which is a town in the district. We have chocolate from DeBrand's Chocolate. They make all of the chocolate, by the way, for all of Trump hotels.
Oh, really?
Out of Fort Wayne, Indiana. So you got those in the shape of race cars. I mean, what's more Hoosier than
exactly
race cars and craft beer? We brushed a little bit of craft whiskey from Three Rivers Distilling in Fort Wayne, Indiana. This is new to our state, craft distilling. Michigan's been at the forefront of it. Indiana's catching up.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
We have a lot of that in our area as well. But most importantly, I brought you baseball hats.
And we love baseball hats here on the program. The logo,
the Fort Wayne Tin Caps, the best logo in all of professional sports. It's an ode to Johnny Appleseed, who's buried in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Is he really?
A couple of towns in Ohio claim him as well, but we've got the goods on him in Fort Wayne.
Wow. You actually have him? He's buried there?
Yes, he's
that
buried,
pretty much settles it, doesn't it?
You would think. So a couple of small towns in Ohio, and I don't know how they get away with it. It seems easily provable. But the great thing about the logo is when it came out, it's the shape of an apple, but he's wearing a pot on the top of his head. So there was a bit of a local controversy about the Fort Wayne potheads.
Excellent.
I think we recovered, and it really is a great logo. So we put our name on it. Makes for great campaign swag, and I thought I'd bring that along.
Oh man, it's fantastic. Representing Indiana 3. And plus, I gotta think, Dunks, that it's nice to have somebody representing Indiana
finally
in here for you.
Yeah, finally I get a little bit of defense on my position that Indiana's a great state. I don't know if you know this, but my friends here.
Well, I don't know if we could loop me into this. This is pretty much a smug.
I think you egg them on.
Do I?
You egg them on.
100% does.
Well, I like you to fight, so that's part of it.
He encourages the Indiana slander. But I mean, listen, that's more localized to Indianapolis. I mean, clearly Indiana's full of fine beer, whiskey, and chocolate. So I'm not against that at all.
Smug said he stopped for gas around the highway once, and he's decided to slander all of Indianapolis.
It's a fair way to assess a city. You stop for gas, and if you're like, wow, it was just an endless field of asphalt.
It's just
nothing
it's
as far
just
as
outrageous.
I can see.
We'll come back. We'll prove you wrong if you come back.
Oh yeah, okay, all right.
I don't think they're going to let
get
him.
outside of Indianapolis.
They could get. You might not be totally safe after all you've said about Indiana.
I always remain, true to the cause. I'm a fan of the state of Indiana. Great people. Just Indianapolis didn't do it for me.
Unbelievable.
All right. Well, listen, we haven't had you on before, but we've been huge fans of your work. We followed it closely. You moved up the ladder pretty fast here. You're sort of driving trains on a lot of the messaging coming out of the Republican conference. One of the things that I find so fascinating, I think most people would have to be an idiot not to observe this happening, but you really put fine points to the argument that the Republican Party is basically the only thing in politics that are representing working class Americans.
No doubt about it. And my story is a good example of where the party has been, where it's going. My dad is retired from a factory in Fort Wayne. He made axles all of his life. Hated politics, hated politicians. I remember he was excited about Perot, and what was that, 92?
92.
Mm-hmm. We had the Perot bumper sticker on the truck. It was embarrassing. But then fast forward, and he was excited in 2016, not about me, about Donald Trump coming down the escalator. Those are the two politicians that he got most excited about in his life. He's in the I took him on a dome tour at the Capitol just a little bit ago today. He is your quintessential blue-collar, working-class voter who for most of his life would have called himself a Democrat. His dad was a coal miner in Kentucky, The Banks family were true hillbillies that moved to Indiana. He was one of 10 boys and girls, and spent his life on the factory floor. My mom was a cook in a nursing home all of her working life as well. So we were a working class family. My dad, union man through and through, and it wasn't until Trump took over the Republican Party that he identified himself as a Republican. He tells me all the time he's embarrassed that he ever called himself a Democrat for much of his life. And as I wrestled with that thought after Trump left office, we were in the wilderness after the November 2020 election, in the minority in the House. We lost the Senate. I was wrestling with this thought: if Trump made us the party of the working class again for the first time since Reagan was in the White House, how do we keep it that way? Mm-hmm. How do we keep my dad as a part of the coalition of voters that we need to win back the majority, win back the White House in 2024? So that was the whole point of the working class memo. And I don't know that McCarthy or any other Republicans in the House disagreed with the thought, but we weren't talking about it. Mm-hmm. And what Republicans do such a poor job of is going home and just gathering people together who work hourly wage jobs and getting them in a room, from teachers to plumbers to mechanics to factory workers, police officers, get them in a room and talk to them and ask them about what matters most to them. We don't do a very good job of that. But if we do that, we can keep those voters at a time when we really need them. There was only one Republican who disagreed vocally with my memo, and she's part of the reason that I wrote it. It was Liz Cheney.
I was about to say.
She called me a neo-Marxist.
Wait,
I'm still trying to wrap my head around it.
How do we square that circle?
But the point being that if we go back to an era where Liz Cheney's point of view and her way of leading the Republican Party is the norm, we lose my dad.
It's like the Chamber of Commerce Republican.
Bingo.
Right.
And I mean, I have the same story where my mother, lifelong Democrat, worked for Democrats, and then Trump made her Republican. She became, right in the Republican primary, she became a Trump supporter, voted for Trump. And I think you have it exactly right. For so long, I'd say, our party was kind of beholden to this kind of like a Paul Ryan idea of, oh, well, I guess the answer to any problem someone could have is just give a corporation a tax cut. And once we became more focused on what is it that Americans are actually concerned with, what are the kitchen table items that they worry about day in, day out, we start winning.
Yeah. So I wrote the memo a year and a half ago to that very point. And we've now, fast forward to last week, Fox News did a poll. They, I think it was on the 14th, headline at foxnews.com, polls show Democrats becoming party of elites as working class minorities shift toward Republicans.
Yeah.
And so the polling bears it out. But that's not just because Republicans. Probably in a bigger way, it's because Democrats have so divorced themselves from working class voters. They don't even attempt to represent them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So
they don't even know how. I mean, the feedback loop within progressive circles right now is hilarious. What they talk about is stuff that nobody is concerned about.
And I think it was exacerbated by the pandemic.
Yeah,
the COVID lockdowns and whatnot for working class people who, they don't have a choice. They got to go out and earn a living, right? And it's like somebody's got to bring you that DoorDash, Stephanie Rule, who scared to go out of her front door.
Farms don't exist, truckers don't exist. The Uber Eats just arrives at the door.
Right.
Gas prices twice as high as what they were the day that Joe Biden took office, but they can't empathize with that factory worker in Fort Wayne, Indiana, because they can't relate. And that's the paradigm shift in American politics that makes us different today than just 6 years ago, where we get that, and if we do better at getting it and go out and talk to these voters in a more effective way, we're not going to just win the majority. We're going to have it for a long time to come.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. But you see it bear out now as we get into election season. I mean, look, everybody thinks that House Republicans are going to have a pretty good day in November. How do you see that? Does that mesh up with what you're seeing with working class voters?
Yeah, it really does. I mean, the link between, if you look at all the polling of Latino voters are more Republican than they have ever been before, right? I mean, I don't have the statistic in front of me, but it is substantial. We have a wide share of Latino voters who are voting
in places we've
Republican.
never voted Republican, right? I mean, we saw the Flores
Yeah.
contests in
Yes.
Texas. We've got, you keep an eye on Nevada and other places with large Hispanic communities that have traditionally voted Democrat, now beginning to become Republican, I think, to your point.
African American voters
Yeah.
are voting Republican more than they ever have before. So what's the big link? The link isn't the color of their skin, it's that these are working class voters.
Mm-hmm.
And they've come our way because they recognize that we represent them far better than the Democrats have, who they've elected in the past, who they realize that this is what they get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Higher gas prices, inflation, and just a complete disconnect from the issues that they deal with on a day-to-day basis, making a living, putting food on the table. So rather than that, the hyper focus on the January 6th
Right.
issues, anything to distract from what they're dealing with is what the Democrats are going to do. So we're in a great spot. We're going to win back the House majority. I have a good feeling we're going to win back the Senate majority too, but we have to stay focused on representing those voters and divorce ourselves from those interests that we used to listen to in a different era, that pander to multinational corporations, corporate America, the U.S. Chamber, that want to sell out American workers for their Chinese interests. So that too was a big part of the working class memo. Is the big issue. A voter like my dad intuitively knows that the good job that he used to have has been sold out to China. Mm-hmm. But he also understands that when he goes to, and voters like my dad, they got this when Trump started talking about being tough on China. He was the first Republican that he'd ever heard talk that way. So then for 4 years of being tough on China, now to backtrack, I mean, the whiplash of that administration, of this administration being so
Yikes.
soft on China,
Yeah.
and flirting with repealing tariffs and issues like that. It's not just their job and the good wage that these workers used to have that they know have been sold out to China, but they know when they go to Walmart and buy an appliance that's made in China, it's going to break in 3 or 4 years versus something that was made in America that would have lasted twice as long. So this is an intuitive issue that working class voters don't need a college degree to understand, that China is our biggest enemy, the biggest existential threat to America. My dad gets that with a high school degree and 30 years of working on a factory floor.
Yeah, it's just observation of life at large, right? How much do you think of this? I mean, look, we all focused rightly on the economy and what that's done to sort of open up this argument to middle-class voters. I think a lot of people can make the argument immigration policies had a big effect, particularly on Hispanic voters, which is counterintuitive to the narrative that we've been sold for 30 years about Hispanics in this country. Crime is another one. I mean, the communities that get hit the hardest by not enforcing the law are the ones that, frankly, are black and brown and do have underprivileged access to things like education. Mm-hmm. Right? So it feels like we're at this moment in time where it's not just sort of the economic argument. The Republicans have, successful with some success made over the last 30 years, but it's everything.
Yeah, if you love America and wave the American flag on your front porch, you're probably a Republican.
Isn't that crazy to think about?
And I think most voters where I come from, they get that.
Totally.
So it's about protecting our American way of life, and if Republicans stick with that versus those who want to tear down our country and change it, like the left is trying to do on a daily basis, then we're on the right side. We're on the side of these voters who aren't always with us, who are with us today. Let's keep them there because it's a powerful recipe for a long time to come.
So, in looking at working class voters, is there anything that surprised you, and what motivated them and the issues that they cared about that you weren't expecting?
Yeah, I mean, I remember sort of growing up in the 90s. It was always about guns and babies. That would attract union workers whose union bosses would tell them to vote Democrat, but a lot of those voters would vote for the Second Amendment for a Republican.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But I think today there's so many more layers on top. Like the China issue, I think is the big issue. But I don't know that I'm not surprised by that, but I'm surprised it took Republicans so long to figure it out. So go back to
right.
You talk about the border too. I mean, this is another great example of the illegal immigration and the threat to American jobs. This is another big issue that working class voters care about. Go back to the 2012 Republican Party. Romney loses to Obama. By the way, Wall Street supported Romney over Obama by a margin of 3-1. Compare that to Trump versus Biden, and it was a 4-1 flip. So Biden picked up donations out of Wall Street 4 times as much as what Trump did. So that's an important takeaway too. But go back to the 2012 Republican Party. Remember, we'd lost, and we lost badly. And what did the RNC do? They conducted an autopsy.
Yeah.
On that big election loss. And what was the conclusion of the autopsy?
Pass amnesty.
Pass amnesty.
Yeah.
And it was like Trump ran and did everything that he could to prove that.
Right.
It was like he read that autopsy and tried to prove it wrong, and he did, right? Because those Latino voters are overwhelmingly with us today, in spite of our party being stronger on borders and tougher on illegal immigration than we ever have been before. So those are big takeaways that you can almost right now our party gets it, and by and large most Republican members in the House get it, but we can't forget it.
Right.
And that's what I continue to be concerned about, is that we will get a few years away from this, and our members of our party will forget, and we'll go back to being the Liz Cheney party of pandering to Wall Street and multinational corporate interest, and we'll lose those voters again if we do.
What I like most about how you've handled this is it's very much in line with our view that you don't take the bait. Focus on what matters to voters. Focus on all of these issues that people are talking about. Don't let the national media dictate what it is that you can engage upon, right? And what I took away from your memo and your subsequent talking about this for the last year and a half is, get this bullshit out of here. I'm focused on what voters actually care about. And it seems like most Republicans have sort of gotten on the same page with that.
Yeah, I think so. I chair the Republican Study Committee, which has been around for almost 50 years. We're a caucus within the House of 160 members. And we've taken the approach of understanding that this is a different moment in American politics, but a different moment for the Republican Party. So we've been putting out memos on not just on this front, but well over a year ago, we were predicting that inflation would be a major election issue this November. So telling members to go out and talk about it and give and frame it in a way where people get it. I don't think we don't have to do that anymore, because voters, by and large, they do get it. They see it. They feel it. But back then, we were talking about inflation of 3, 4, 5%, and now we're 9.1%. So gas prices, but also you talk about the importance of the cultural issues too. I mean, we told members a year and a half ago to lean into the culture war, go out and talk about these issues. These issues aren't hard to talk about. Critical race theory, anti-Americanism, the pushing radical gender theories in schools on our kids that are 7, 8, 9 years old.
Grade school kids.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff is our voters care about it. Voters across the board care about it. We bring Democrats to our side when we go out and fight these fights. So that's what we've retailored. The RSC was always sort of for a long time, for too long, it was a quiet group on Capitol Hill that put out legislative bulletins to our members. But we're trying to get out ahead and frame these issues in a way that will help us not just win back the majority, but recenter our party where it needs to be for a long time to come.
A couple things. So you touched on China economically, and you also talked about your work on committees. You're also a member of the House Armed Services Committee. And I wanted you to tell us a little bit about what work you think needs to go into keeping America safe from China's aggressions in that sense. Specifically, like in cyber, you think about things like TikTok, which is becoming an issue that I think needs to be more at the forefront.
Totally. So a couple of years ago, I co-chaired something called the Future Defense Task Force with a Democrat from Boston named Seth Moulton. I think he ran for president at one point, so maybe a few people have heard of him. But I like Seth. We work closely on this effort, and then COVID came and sort of crashed it. But the big takeaway that I took from that is the complexity of how China approaches the future of warfare is something that's beyond the comprehension of what most Americans can grasp. When you consider that anyone who has taken a 23andMe or Ancestry.com biometrics test, right? What do you call that? Mm-hmm. You send it back to these companies. They send it overseas to China to be read, for that data to be read by a company there who they outsource it to. The company happens to be owned by the Chinese Communist Party.
Jeez.
So they're collecting your biometrics. When you talk about TikTok, they're collecting your personal data. we told under Trump, we told the Pentagon that our troops could no longer use these Ancestry.com type tests, because in the future of warfare, that kind of data, when it comes to when it comes to biological warfare, I mean, that kind of data becomes very useful to our biggest enemy.
I can't imagine China releasing some kind of like a biological agent that would hurt people.
Not at all.
Something like a coronavirus.
Right. So the multi-layered approach to how they're storing our data, when I first got to Congress, there were a few of us that were talking about some of these issues that from on the cyber front. What's their big telecom company? I'm forgetting.
Tencent.
Not Tencent. The
WeChat?
Huawei. So that was a big issue for 3 or 4 years ago. But then you fast forward to in China, they have something called the 1,000 Talents Program, and the 1,000 Talents Programs takes Chinese nationals and they place them in strategic places around the world, especially in America, where they are in decision-making positions where they can help the motherland. If you go read if you go read the oath that they take when they're part of when they become sworn in to the 1,000 Talents Program, that they talk about supporting the motherland. So we found out that the chief investment officer of the nation's largest state pension program, CalPERS, in California, was a guy named Yubin Meng. Yubin Meng, turns out, was a part of the 1,000 Talents Program.
No kidding.
And he gets placed. He becomes a chief investment officer of the largest state pension program, and he's steering state investment dollars to Chinese Communist Party owned companies in shipbuilding, sophisticated technologies, even the surveillance company that they use
for the Uyghurs,
round up the Uyghurs and put them in a detention camp. So you have Chinese retirees who, because of this guy, are investing in our biggest adversaries' military national security operation that they're going to use against us. So when you start understanding all of the layers and the approaches that they take and how little we do about it, and now we have an administration that doesn't just turn a blind eye to them. I mean, there are many reasons to believe that
this administration is using TikTok.
Yes.
It's unbelievable.
Think about that.
The last administration didn't. The last administration was the first administration of our lifetime that took the threat seriously. They could, in many ways, they could have done a lot more. But the whiplash to back to where we are today should be something that should keep every American awake at night.
Totally. Well, so let me ask you this: God willing, we're able to get a majority back. You'll have oversight capability with this administration for what we all hope is the last 2 years. I can't imagine Joe Biden makes it beyond that for a whole host of reasons. But how can you keep this Republican Party together to work as a team under that? Because we know, the biggest challenge in being a majority when you've got an administration of the other party is to try to keep your folks together and try to have a united voice and not sort of splinter off. What's your confidence level in our ability to do that, you think, next year?
Well, we have to do it. We don't have a choice.
Yeah, I mean, you just really don't.
And what it comes back to is a vision, right? And being able to rally our members around a vision. I happen to believe that McCarthy's going to be the best speaker that we've had in a really long time, because I think he can do that. I think he can rally us around an agenda and a vision and push it forward. And that vision isn't just advancing the Trump-era policies. Again, that if you go back and read the working class memo that I wrote a year and a half ago, the conclusion of it is that if our party centers itself in the Trump policies, it's not about the name Jim Banks or Donald Trump or anybody's name that's going to move us and rally us around that agenda. It's about the agenda itself.
That's right.
It's about what we stand for.
That's the biggest challenge too.
And that Trump era agenda is what attracts working class voters. So the next 2 years are critical, because if we don't do that and turn off these voters, there's no way we win the White House in 2024. I mean,
totally.
We have to keep these voters in our coalition. So it's going to take Leader McCarthy, other leaders that we have in our party to rally us around that agenda and cast a vision to do so. And I'm, at this point, fairly optimistic that we can do that. I mean, I want to be one of those leaders coming out of being chairman of the Republican Study Committee. We've tried to write the playbook and advance a vision with what we're doing at RSC. a roadmap, if you will, that can be very useful in that moment.
Well, it's incredibly useful. It's very important.
I should say the oversight part of it, the accountability of this administration, what the Democrats try to do to our country, is we have to think about that as 50% or more of it.
Mm-hmm.
It is.
Absolutely.
And when I go home, my voters they're not necessarily excited about Republicans winning the majority because they're very skeptical of us for good reason. But they demand action. They demand us to fight back. And
That's right.
And demand us to use our oversight power to do to this administration what no one's ever done before, to hold them accountable for what they've done.
Yeah, and let me ask you about that. Just last question before we get into the end of our interview. You were in Afghanistan. I got to imagine a big piece of the oversight function is actually getting back to what happened there. Because I don't feel like we ever really got to the bottom of the true motivations, which I think are all entirely political. Mm-hmm. But then the lack of planning and the willful ignorance of anybody that had any idea of what we were doing when we pulled out of there, and the disaster and losing the Marines that we did.
Yeah, it's shameful, and it, to this day, makes me sick to my stomach. I served there recently. I was there in 2014 and 15, and I came back, and that's when I ran for Congress. To this point, there has never been an investigation, oversight hearing. In fact, when Democrats took control, they eliminated the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee on the Armed Services Committee. So there's been no accountability for it. The tough questions have never been answered. And on day one, we need to make this a prime mission of the Armed Services Committee. Because if we don't hold them accountable, you're teaching a whole generation of military leaders that you can get away with that.
It's exactly right.
And when it comes to, I have a lot of criticism of General Milley, but the biggest one is that he is training all of the flag officers underneath him who one or two of them one day will have his job, that you can become a political general and you can get away with making political decisions and never be held accountable for it. So we have to hold them accountable. Otherwise, we're going to see this type of poor leadership for a long time to come.
Well, listen, that's music to our ears for sure. We've been talking about this one for a long time. Top of the list in terms of what I'm concerned about. Although it's hard to even keep a list at this point.
Yeah, it's a long list.
Yeah. It's incredible. These guys are a disaster. All right, I got 3 big questions that we asked everybody here. And this is, these are important things here, Mr. Banks. If you can plan your last meal on Earth, what would it be?
Obviously, I practice it a lot.
The art of eating a meal.
Yeah, and never knowing if it's going to be your last meal, so you better go all out. My favorite restaurant is right across the street from the ballpark in downtown Fort Wayne, where the Ten Caps play. And it's a fast food gyro restaurant, King Gyros. They've got these sloppy gyro sandwiches, and
nice.
There's no doubt that that's where I would go.
That's it.
Yeah,
you're gonna go pick that out.
Yeah,
I love that.
Maybe I have 2 of them.
Wow.
Well, I mean, you've got to slide in sideways.
They're heavy and giant.
You get some dessert in there, like what do they have there?
Man,
maybe a baklava.
They might, but yeah.
You just focused
I'm just saying it's your last one.
Focused on the euro.
Yeah.
All right. If you never got into public service, because you've sort of recently been in the House, but you've had almost a lifetime of public service. I know you were a small businessman and everything before that, but you've been doing this and working for people for a while. If you never had that at all, if you just could say, blue sky, here's like 15 years of my life that I could do anything I want with, really blue sky, what would it be?
Well, the best job I ever had, I worked for a family that had a very large commercial construction company in Fort Wayne. They built big buildings. So I did business development for them for 5 years before I got elected to the state house and after. And I know nothing about construction, and that's the funny part of it. But I love the industry because it was all relational. And I from time to time I do think about what I would do if I weren't in politics.
I got to.
But it would be to start a business, start a small business, grow it, make money, and have something to pass on to the kids.
It sounds like watching something get built is something of a priority
absolutely.
for you. Yeah.
So Smug's knock is that there's only 2-story buildings in Indianapolis.
Indianapolis.
So this is confirmation. This is confirmation that there are large buildings in Indiana.
Yeah, after Congress, I guess you could build them.
It's unbelievable.
You got to come to Fort Wayne. We'll treat you better in Fort Wayne.
Oh, that's good. All right, we might have to take him up on that, Smug.
Absolutely.
Plus, I'm just going to drive you to the middle of Indianapolis and leave you there. All right, so our last question is the hardest one, and our view is that people are generally motivated by one of two things: thrill of victory or the agony of defeat. Thrill of victory people are always the sort of sunny optimist charging up the hill. The agony of defeat people are somebody who's ever had any accomplishment. It lasts for like 2 seconds. They enjoy it for like a moment. But every setback they've ever had in life, it lasts a lifetime. They work to try to overcome it. And that's their primary motivation. Mr. Banks, where do you find yourself?
I have no idea. My wife would probably answer this better or different than I would, but I'm not afraid of losing. So I suppose the thrill of victory is what is motivating to me. I've never been afraid of just putting it all out there. I mean, when you run for office, you have to recognize that you might lose and not be afraid of it and go plow through and to win. So I think that's how I would answer it. But I don't know if my staff would call me a sunny optimist. I know my wife wouldn't. So
You think there might be some dissent in that?
but I need to study that one a little bit further. But I'm not afraid to lose.
Yeah. It's basically about how much losing bothers you versus winning has you enjoy something, right? So, like, if you think about your life and the biggest victories you've ever had, did you enjoy them more than you lamented each setback? And that's kind of how you. I mean, it's very tough. That's why it's one of our three. It's the hardest question there is.
Yeah, I'll stick with my answer.
Yeah, sunny optimist. There he is. Well, listen, for our listeners who want to help you out, either on the campaign side or on the official side and following what you guys are doing, where do they find you?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I'm very proud of what we've done at Republican Study Committee. So find us at Republican Study on Twitter, and we throw lots of flames there. And on my find me on my personal Twitter page too, at Rep Jim Banks, on the official side. And then on the campaign side, jimbanks.us is our website. You can find us there too.
Excellent. Well, listen, we are really looking forward to all the good work that you're not only doing and will continue to do for the rest of the cycle, but really most importantly next year. And you get the opportunity to put these ideas into action. So thank you for coming over. Thanks for all this stuff too.
Enjoy. Enjoy. Not too much.
not
Great
too
to be
much.
with you. It's really an honor to be with you. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Congressman
so
Jim
much.
Banks.